Welcome to the Rational Optimist Podcast, the only podcast that will not talk about politics this week. Coming up, the innovation famine is over. Why a burst of new progress is happening in space travel, nuclear, self-driving cars, clean energy, all at the same time. Then we give thanks for fracking and the huge economic gains it's brought to depressed areas of the U.S. Then we dig into some amazing news about the progress in saving prematurely born babies. I'm Dan Steinhardt. He's Stephen McBride. This is the Rational Optimist Podcast. Stephen, tell us your thesis about the innovation famine and why it's over.
So the innovation famine, Dan, summed up was we've got incredible innovation in these devices over the past couple of years. But basically everything else in the real world, we'd have 50 years of stagnation. Okay, so it takes longer to build a house now than it did 50 years ago. Airplanes, they're still flying at the same speeds as they were in the 1950s, which to someone who does many transatlantic flights, it is a nightmare that you cannot get a non-red eye flight back to Europe. We've closed more nuclear power plants than we've opened this century, and that Baltimore bridge that collapsed in March, they're telling me it's taking twice as long to rebuild as it took to build. That's the innovation famine. And the good news is that it's over. So the innovations that we've seen in the past 2 or 3 years, they blow everything away that we've seen in the past two or three decades. And it's not even close. So last week, I talked about my first Waymo trip, first trip in a self-driving car in San Francisco. It was amazing. We have Neuralink putting chips in people's brains that allow paralyzed people to walk again. We have doctors designing cancer-killing shots with mRNA technology. You have startups building nuclear reactors, small enough to fit in your garage, but powerful enough to fuel a whole city. You have a revival in supersonic flight. You have SpaceX doing what it's doing. You even have flying cars, right? The symbol of the future. This, if you were to sum it up, the innovation famine in one, it's that Peter Thiel's line, we wanted flying cars, but all we got is 140 characters Twitter. And to cap it all off, DARPA wants to put a train on the moon, and it's put out contracts for this. So for me, the innovation famine is over. Real world physical innovation is back, and it's something to be celebrated.
So all the digital innovation of the last 50 years, especially the last 10 years, is great. Connected us to the internet, created new businesses, good stuff, but not nearly as good as what could have happened in the physical world. With, like you said, flying cars, self-driving cars, supersonic flight. Why did the innovation famine happen in the first place?
Well, listen, I don't want to go on about this, but it's our favorite topic. It's the energy stuff, right? So people might know the website WTF happened in 1971, and it's basically all these metrics about how everyone was kind of winning in America up until the early 1970s, and then something strange happened in the early 1970s. You know, the rich started getting richer and the poor's wages didn't go up. Productivity went up, but wages didn't go up. Income inequality, so on and so forth. My favorite website on the whole internet, and it gets the year wrong. It was 1973, and it was because of the oil shock, and basically energy became expensive overnight, and more importantly than even becoming expensive, it got volatile. So for decades, energy prices were relatively stable, became expensive and volatile overnight, which essentially all that physical innovation that was happening in the real world, innovators and entrepreneurs looked at this and said, how can I plan for the next 5 or 10 years when energy prices are going to be expensive? It means the things I sell are going to be, more expensive. I will sell less of them. I can't plan for the future. So it really was the energy, the oil shocks of 1973 and 1979. That was the root cause of all this.
So the expensiveness in energy is the reason we've gotten very little physical innovation. Just to put this in perspective, our grandparents witnessed, or they were alive when the Wright brothers took their first flight. They were alive for the first time humans achieved flight, and within their lifetime, we got to the moon. That's how fast things can move and how fast things were moving before the innovation famine. Obviously, it takes a lot of energy to get to the moon. It takes a lot of willpower, a lot of working together too. But one thing you can't do without is energy to get to the moon. So now we're refocused on cheap energy, largely in nuclear, solar too. And you think the unleashing of this cheap energy, cheap abundant energy is the thing that ends the innovation famine?
This is the thing. It's the thing that started the innovation famine. It's the thing that's going to start the innovation feast. So yeah, I mean, as we said last week, you don't have to be team nuclear or team solar. You can be team energy abundance. And this is really what unlocks all these amazing things that are happening. So to give you one very specific example, supersonic jets, they use 6 times more fuel than regular jets. Okay, to make those economical, to make it so everyone in the world can afford a trip on the new Concorde, got to make fuel cheap. So that's what, solar and nuclear and all these things are doing downstream of it.
All right. Well, that's reason enough to be rational optimist alone, is that the innovation feast is here.
Yeah. And, another thing is that I think people, there's this, tell me if you think I'm right, but there's this sense that technology has benefited the few, not the many. Do you get that sense?
That's what people say. I don't personally believe it.
Right, but it's the overwhelming sense that a bunch of rich Silicon Valley billionaires, they created all these tools that are bad for us, and we know they are bad in some ways. They got rich off it, and yet we're the ones that suffer, or at least we didn't see the gains flow through, right? And I think the innovation feast, innovation in the real world is going to change that. I think it really has an outsized impact. For example, when I was in San Francisco getting the Waymo, I heard a woman say to her son, "Did you see those cars with nobody in the driver's seat? Aren't they amazing?" And it's just this like in your face, no explanation needed, great thing for the world. And I think you multiply that by all the things that's going on, I think it's going to be something amazing.
Kids are a good filter for this stuff, right? They know rockets are amazing. They know self-driving cars are amazing. Digital innovation, they're not all that impressed by Google.
Right. It's just, you instantly have to explain, hey, before Google, we had to you go to libraries and stuff, and now you have all on your phone. They're going like, lame. So that's why I'm excited about the rockets. I'm excited about the supersonic jets, the whole lot. I think it's going to be an incredible decade ahead if we fight for the innovators and let them do their thing.
Mm-hmm. That's what we're here for.
So speaking of the innovation feast, we're used to seeing Elon Musk's SpaceX launch things into space, but this past week, a SpaceX capsule carrying 4 astronauts from the International Space Center safely parachuted down just off the Florida coast. Tell us what's going on with this one.
So the picture you see, this is the SpaceX Dragon capsule bobbing in the ocean near the coast of Florida. This capsule rescued astronauts who were stranded in space, and the reason they were stranded in space is because Boeing screwed up. Their Starliner ship malfunctioned and it couldn't safely take the astronauts home. We're happy the astronauts are home safe. I'll let you do the raving about SpaceX, and it deserves all the praise we can heap upon it. I'm gonna lambaste Boeing, if that's okay with you. So the real story here is stodgy old Boeing versus hyper competent SpaceX. So the backstory is Boeing is essentially the favored child of the U.S. space industry, right? They get the best contracts, they get the most money, they get priority, and Boeing has essentially squandered it all. So we shouldn't just make fun of mistakes, right? Everybody makes mistakes. This is a mistake Boeing made. But get this. This launch was originally planned in 2017 by Boeing. And there have been so many issues that it did not launch until 2024. So 7 years of delays. Only in government contracting land are delays measured in years, right? They finally launched the thing, and the astronauts get stranded in space, and Elon Musk's SpaceX has to come along and rescue them. It's delicious irony.
It's incredible that this once great company is now can't launch a space vehicle. Multiple planes, the 737 MAX crashed and actually did kill people. But it's amazing that more people didn't die from Boeing, because you remember that, what was the Alaska Airlines door blew off at 16,000 feet in the air? Like, what are we doing here, guys? What makes me very optimistic about the future is that if you look at all these areas, kind of for 20 or 30 years, we've had this stagnation. And now, whether it's in space or just generally aerospace, SpaceX is coming along. and kind of disrupting Boeing. Or in defense, you have Anduril and Palantir. It seems like there's a trend where the innovators have said, guys, enough. We need to step up and kind of attack these stodgy linked to government areas.
Yeah. And just to put some numbers to it, the U.S. government paid Boeing more than double what it paid SpaceX to complete these missions. And SpaceX completed them and then completed some of Boeing's mission for it for a lot less money. So it's just night and day, right?
Right. Yeah, it's incredible. I mean, and I think the government toyed. They didn't even want to give SpaceX a contract. They toyed with giving Boeing the whole lot. Paid millions more than SpaceX and 7 years to lay on a mission that they couldn't even complete. I mean, it's just incredible. Where else would you get it? Yeah,
it's just SpaceX is hyper competent. That's the single best word to describe it. It's like the government is not going to use Elon Musk to bail it out unless it has no other choice.
Right.
And had no other choice.
Just back to the idea of the kind of the innovators coming into all these bureaucratic areas. As I said, you have Anduril and Palantir in defense, which Palantir the other day, the first defense company to get added to the S&P 500 in I think 60 years. But then even you have Tesla in autos, or the small modular reactor companies in nuclear, or even there's housing is this big giant problem. We just need to build more housing. But you have all these rules. And now you have people like QB or Icon, which are 3D printing or making houses and factories. So it seems like we're actually pushing back against all this bureaucracy and just craziness.
Yeah, and in case this is anyone's first podcast and you're wondering why space and why we even care about this, it's not just the playground for rich guys like Elon Musk, SpaceX, and Jeff Bezos's Blue Origin. We can do things in space that we cannot do on Earth. For example, the first ever human knee meniscus was created in a biolab on the International Space Station within the last 2 years or so. And those kinds of things are not possible on Earth, or they're a lot more difficult on Earth, because if you try to print a human organ on Earth when it's in its earlier, less mature stages, it just collapses. Space, no gravity, it changes the equation for all kinds of things like making human organs, drug development, manufacturing. You've said you think the iPhone 25 might be manufactured on the moon. Is that a real prediction, or you really think that? Or
I think,
is that
chips come first. So just a little bit of context. Basically, to me, I'm thinking about what's the most impressive things humans have ever done. And it's going to the moon in 1969 and Elon catching the giant booster rocket. Besides those two things, it's making computer chips. So, they can now print transistors, 20,000 of them on the width of a human hair. We're talking about nano manufacturing here. But to do that on Earth is extremely expensive, and you have to do it in rooms that are 10,000 times cleaner than Earth, and a single speck of dust can cost you billions of dollars or millions of dollars if a machine goes down that ruins the silicon wafer. Space, the microgravity, and just the general lack of oxygen means it's a natural clean room up there. So you could imagine TSMC or Intel or Samsung putting a chip manufacturing facility on the moon. Okay, I think that is going to happen, and yeah, maybe Apple makes the iPhone in 10 years, or Meta makes its AI glasses on the moon, made on the moon, shipped to Earth. I love it. Or maybe we're just all living on Mars by then. You never know.
And the only reason any of this is even possible is because SpaceX cut the price of space travel by 98%, 99% now. And imagine how much cheaper that's going to get as, one, the learning curves keep making it cheaper, and two, energy gets cheaper and abundant, because I'm sure that's one of the biggest costs of reaching space.
Totally. If you can use cheap solar power to make synthetic aviation fuel, that makes it even cheaper to go to space. So yeah, just think about all the possibilities that will open up now that it's cheaper than ever to go to space, and only getting cheaper.
Put this clean energy chart on the screen. This is going to shock a lot of people. One state is lapping all of the other U.S. states in building clean energy infrastructure. This state is not California. Maybe you can see on the top, it's Texas. Tell us why.
Incredible. Right, incredible. I actually did ask a gentleman on the plane on my recent trip to Austin, where do you think is the leading state? He was from Wisconsin. He did correctly predict Texas, but I'm guessing a lot of people wouldn't have predicted this. So what's going on here? It's not because they believe necessarily in solar power or they're environmentalists. It's because Texas has its own grid, the only state in America, I believe, to have its own grid, separated from the rest, and it has less bureaucracy, less rules, it takes less time to roll out things. So on average these days, you put a solar panel in, to connect it to the grid, it's going to take you an average 7 years. Texas, much less regulation, much less time to market. So that's what's going on here.
So we're expected to connect 6.4 gigawatts of new battery storage power to Texas's grid this year. That's as much battery capacity as the entire United States built last year.
Incredible. Texas's battery capacity up 2,500% since that 2021 winter storm where there was snow in Texas. And this just speaks to the importance of sure, you can have rules about things, but just don't tell me that I have to do a 5-year environmental study about how my solar panel is going to affect the desert tortoise. Or Meta recently had a nuclear power facility blocked because a species of rare bee was found next to the data center. So this is the type of thing that you have to look at the whole picture, right?
Batteries are exciting. They solve all of our energy problems once they get good enough, because the sun produces all the energy we could ever need. If we could capture and store that and use it when we actually need it, that's climate crisis solved. That's carbon emissions solved. That's expensive energy solved.
So yeah, I mean, the amazing thing about batteries is just like solar, they've gotten a lot cheaper over the past 30 years or so. So I believe they are down 99.6%. The cost of an average battery down 99.6% in the last couple of years. Today, solar is still, if you look at the cost of solar, you'll see charts that say, oh, it's the cheapest energy source. That doesn't factor in that you still have to put all these batteries on the grid to store that excess energy. But as the battery prices continue to go down and as they get more efficient and denser, that's only going to improve. So you could imagine a scenario in 10 years where solar plus batteries is actually one of the cheapest sources of energy.
Yeah. So two things can be true at the same time, right? The solar zealots are who say that solar is already the cheapest form of energy. That is incorrect in any meaningful way because it doesn't factor in batteries. It doesn't factor in the cost of backup fossil fuel plants that you need because solar is not reliable enough yet and batteries aren't powerful and cheap enough yet. At the same time, the trajectory of the price of solar and the trajectory of batteries, extrapolate that out a few years and we're going to solve most of these problems. That's the thing I think both you and I disagree with. A lot of people we respect who look at solar and say, yeah, it's an okay supplemental energy source, but it's never going to solve our core problems. I think there's a pretty good chance it will just because of these learning curves.
Right. You know, I met Casey Handmer, who is the CEO and founder of Terraform Industries. The company is basically building a machine that turns air into synthetic natural gas. And his prediction is that in a decade or two, 95% of our energy needs will be met by solar. And you know why he talked about it so convincingly and he walked me through how that's possible? And he's building a business around it that he actually convinced me it's a real possibility. Mm-hmm. So I would, again, it's kind of like saying, you know, you'll never be able to do a real-time video call on our phones. And saying that 15 years ago was true then, but the technology, you could see the curve, you could see it continue to improve and get faster and cheaper. And now here we are.
By 2040, do we get the majority of our electricity from solar?
Oh, it's so hard to say. I mean, what I will say is that 2 years ago, even a year ago, I would have said impossible. Now I think there's maybe a 30% chance that that's true.
All right, exciting area.
You know, one thing I want to talk about here is that I think Texas shows the power of having sensible regulation, but not overburdensome regulation. And I often think if today energy is incredibly centralized, right? There's a couple of power plants or whatever, and we get all our energy from the grid. I often wonder if solar energy and batteries is going to enable this off-grid, decentralized future where every home or town or city is going to have its own separate grid. And of course, that will be made possible by solar panels everywhere and battery packs everywhere. Even talk to my neighbor. He has solar panels on his house. He has an electric car. It's kind of this circular system that works beautifully for him. And if you can just have a backup grid, I think that's like an exciting future potentially.
Own separate grid. Elaborate on that. So every person, every house would be self-sufficient. You'd harvest your own energy and use your own energy.
You'd have that to a certain degree, but maybe you have that and that covers, I don't know, over the average of a year because the solar power is not as effective in the winter when the sun isn't shining. Maybe that over the year covers half of your energy needs. And then for the other half, your town or your city has a couple of micro nuclear reactors that can, each one of them can power 10,000 homes. And I often think about that instead of a statewide or a multi-state grid, where if something happens, you know, a lot of the grid goes down. I think I look and I say it takes 7 years to connect a new power plant to the grid. That's surely not sustainable given how fast we are rolling out solar.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, you know, sticking on the topic of energy, I'm going to take any opportunity to talk about the most underrated innovation of the last decade or two, which is fracking. So for people that don't know, fracking, essentially a technology that allowed America to release oil and gas trapped deep down in our rocks. And a new post on Twitter this week highlighted just how incredible fracking has been for North Dakota. Dan, why don't you talk through us what we're seeing here?
All right, so put this on the screen, please. You're looking at a picture of a bird's eye view of the United States from 1992 versus a bird's eye view of the United States from 2013. And it shows basically the light intensity of various areas of the United States. So you can see around New York City, it's very bright. Around Chicago, it's very bright. Around most of the American West, it's very dark. So one of the biggest fracking boom towns in the country is Williston, North Dakota. And you can see in the picture on the left, before fracking came to Williston, it's dark. Not a whole lot going on there. Not a whole lot of human activity. Not a whole lot of economic growth. In fact, North Dakota's population grew precisely 0% from the Great Depression until 2008. Enter fracking. Now you can see the image on the right. There's a huge burst of light in Williston, North Dakota. This reminds me of the map, the satellite map of nighttime view of North Korea versus South Korea. And you can see South Korea is lit up because they've got technology and people are flourishing there. And North Korea is completely dark because it's a communist country. They've got no progress. They've got shortages of everything. So on the left here, North Dakota before fracking. On the right, North Dakota after fracking. It's a miracle. And North Dakota's population actually started to grow when this happened. I mentioned that from the Great Depression to 2008, zero growth. Since 2008, grew by 140,000 people.
Incredible. Contrary to popular belief, fracking has been awesome for the areas that it's in. I think if you told someone that, people would disagree with you because you're doing these big giant oil wells and you're releasing all this terrible toxic gas, and that's just not the case. And there's tons of research that basically says, hey, you can predict how wealthy an area is based on its the view of its nighttime lights. Like this is not just some vanity metric that we're picking out of nowhere. It's basically a 1-to-1 correlation. If you have tons of lights at nighttime, generally your city is rich. Just another big win for fracking, right? This has to be the most underrated innovation over the past couple of decades.
And fracking has something for everyone. If you're an environmentalist, you can thank fracking for reducing America's carbon output by 20%. If you're a capitalist, you can thank fracking for economic growth unlike anything North Dakota had ever seen before. If you're a nationalist, if you're an America First guy, you can thank fracking for making our country energy independent. So it's been great across the board. We love fracking.
On that topic, I want to put another chart on the screen which shows the United States now produces the most oil of any country ever, more than Russia, more than 40. We now produce 48% more oil than Saudi Arabia. Right? And as the chart shows, it's a great title, the America of oil. Right? We are. I'm Irish, but I'm de facto American. The energy capital or the oil capital of the world, and not just oil, but fracking allows you to basically mine oil and gas. And you can see this next chart that a decade ago, America was a minnow producer of natural gas. Now the world's largest seller, overtaking Qatar. So just incredible.
How do we get more people to celebrate fracking? Because you say the word to the average person and it still brings up images of like muck and environmental destruction and tap water being lit on fire.
Yeah. It has a PR problem. Just like nuclear, fracking has a PR problem. So we need to come up with a new name. We need fracking. It's kind of a little bit harsh. That's CK. I think shale is softer, although it still might be tainted. So you're an expert marketer, Dan. I am tasking you with coming up for a new name for fracking, and put a slide deck together, and you're going to pitch it to the American public.
All right. Remind me. We'll revisit that next week.
Excellent.
Great news. Doctors can now save very prematurely born babies. This is from a story in the Wall Street Journal. It's about how more and more babies born at 22 weeks are now surviving. A 22-week baby, just to give some context, is 1 pound and about the size of a sweet potato. And for most of human history, even very recent human history, if your child was born at 22 weeks, it was a tragic end. Why don't you tell us more about this?
Yeah, so this is we stumbled upon a rare sighting, right? A positive news story in the corporate media. It's essentially about these incredible medical advances that have made hospitals able to save younger and premature newborns. So some of the hospitals with this new equipment, they can now save as high as 2/3 of babies born before 22 weeks. And just to put this in some concrete terms, the difference in these new medical advances, it's really the difference between life or death for the roughly 8,000 infants born between 22 and 24 weeks a year. So pretty amazing, right?
The story in this article is absolutely jaw-dropping. So there's a mom who goes into labor at 22 weeks, emergency, right? She goes to the hospital. The hospital tells her, there's no hope for your child. You can hold her until she dies. The mom refuses to take that for an answer, walks out of the hospital, finds a new hospital on Facebook, drives 7 miles to get there, and her prematurely born baby is now a healthy 4-year-old.
I think about Matt Ridley's story. So first of all, that's just incredible. It reminds me of Matt Ridley's story in The Rational Optimist about how the average person today is richer and better off than the French kings of the past. And in 1963, President's wife, Jackie Kennedy, gave birth to a boy at 34 weeks old, and he only lived for 2 days, right? So that was the richest or the most well-connected, the most powerful person in the world, and they couldn't save a baby at 34 weeks. And now we're routinely saving kids, just average kids, at 22 weeks or 24 weeks.
Yeah, this really hits harder when you're a parent. I mean, man, it's just, so the fact that certain hospitals can perform these procedures and save babies, but most can't, is something everyone should know. But I did not even know that before I read this article. And one of my sons was born and had to spend 24 hours in the NICU. Like, stuff tends to go wrong when you have kids. And man, everyone needs to know this. Everyone needs to know this, right?
Yeah, public service announcement for all rational optimists. This is, hopefully it doesn't happen, and the odds are it won't happen to you, but it's just something worth considering. It's if you're going to go to a hospital and go for consultations with them, you're having kids, just ask them, do they have these facilities available? And maybe if they don't, consider somewhere else. I mean, look, it takes on average $100,000. That's what it costs to to build these facilities per child. Sorry, $100,000 per child to have these expert facilities. But you pay enough in health insurance, so I think you should probably try to seek out the best hospital.
Man, what a story!
Yeah. So maybe I think all the money that government spends on, I think we will agree, billions of dollars is wasteful. At least, I think you can easily, spend $10 billion and get every single hospital in America upgraded so you can save the lives of thousands of precious infants. So that's what we should do.
I like that. You got a dose of optimism to send us off for the week?
I do. Back to your earlier point about America cutting carbon emissions. Chart I'm going to show you is the change in CO2 emissions and GDP, which is basically how large the economy is. So you can see since 2000, America's GDP has grown more than 50%, and yet CO2 emissions are down 17%. And of course, to our earlier point, that is all being fracking. So fracking essentially allowed us to wean ourselves mostly off coal, and natural gas is much, much cleaner than coal. So this just shows that innovation and technology is really the solution to all our climate problems.
It's not either or. It's not you can grow, but then you have to accept a dirty environment. The richest countries and the countries that grow the fastest have the cleanest environments. That's another thing we need to shout from the rooftops.
Yep. Long fracking, long innovation, long America.
All right, viewers, you can boost our optimism by hitting the subscribe button, ringing that bell, and leaving us a comment. This greatly helps our channel grow. We appreciate all of your support, and we'll see you next week. Thanks, Stephen.
See you soon, Dan.